So, colleagues, we can start. Although it's the second day of forum, and end of the day, I didn't think people would live up to the AI, and those who will leave, only those most stable, or AI itself. But we are much more than that, and it's pleasant. So we continue the topic that have been discussed in many speeches, and we had a separate panel on this topic, and in the plenary session leaders told us about that. So the topic is voguish and scary sometimes, and people scared us that, like the day after tomorrow, AI would get a personality and we won't distinguish. But actually, it's pleasant that this topic receives so much attention, even at the government level. And with our colleagues from Sberbank, yesterday or today, a national strategy for AI was signed. So overall, the topic is perceived by the state and various sectors as extremely important. So we'll try to discuss. The topic is kind of provocative, what is under the hood. So it's pleasant that we have colleagues here that know about this topic as experts, so I can ask special questions to them. So you will also have this opportunity. I have this communication device on an iPad. I can get questions that you can ask online, and part of questions I can ask to my colleagues if we have time left. So send it to me. We have here Maxim Yeremenko, Managing Director of Development of Competency for Data Science of Sberbank. Ivan Komarov, Head of Group of Machine Department of CFT. Dmitry Makeev, Head of Banking of Rubbles. Konstantin Markelov, Vice President for Business Technologies, Tinkoff Bank. Alexey Natekin, Founder and Dictator of the Community, Open Data Science. As you see, it's very, as people are experts, and we can discuss on more important topics, but I cannot avoid the topic that was touched upon on the first plenary session, where big versus small. And German Gref said that innovation are not happening beyond the big one, and only the big one can succeed, and FinTech don't have any chances. But he got a question then, why are you buying FinTech companies, and why do you need them if they don't have innovation? So, if possible, we start with Ivan. What are your thoughts about this, big or small, and who has more chances, who is more flexible, and where are innovations? Thank you. Interesting question. We have an answer. We worked with small and medium, and we are not small. In principle, everyone has its role, but I would rather agree with German Gref, because what is large? Large means there is a resource in order to make it. I mean, hire good guys, and that means that you have the data, because we call it data science, so data should be available. If you don't have the data, then what are we going to do? So we can hire mathematicians, but then the big would be scary with these smart mathematicians and our data. That's why ecosystem is being built, but small, difficult. They need to think how to merge with the big one.
And we can see that in the mergers, they buy up the teams, and that's about it. Thank you, Dmitry. I cannot agree with the previous statement. As a representative of a small company, we have a 50-man staff. It's not a problem because working with Sberbank or Tinkoff Bank and many others, it's possible to receive certain expertise in structuring models that you can further scale to other banks that will never invest a lot into that. Banks from top 20 down, so they don't have the money, but thanks to us being in a market, they can get this product of the same level as Sberbank without investing into development. This is my opinion. Moreover, let me add, there are certain core competences for banks and retailers. It is true, and it is great when they're being developed and all the resources are applied to that. There are some other side effects, and developing something from scratch is not always worth it. But buying a version, maybe rewriting it in a few years, I think for most banks this is a much bigger priority than doing things independently from scratch. Thank you. Thank you, Konstantin. And I would like to oppose or clarify Dmitry's statement. Actually, with AI, the core competencies for the bank of the future is the core competency for the bank of the future. We have to understand that. So if some people are trying to save, don't have any illusions. You're learning from them and they're learning from you. And everyone understands that the bank of the future is the one that foresees, anticipates expectations. And if a third party does that, you will probably lose. Today, the core competency is interfaces. We're all fighting for that. We make the best interfaces. That's what clients want. And if this is removed, you will be commoditized, and you will only become a simple provider, service provider, or processing provider. Thank you, Alexey. Well, what could we add? This is a case in point of a statement that's both right and wrong, depending on the angle you look at that. How do we measure innovations? In units, in successful units, in profits, in financial returns, and when do we measure them? There is a list of innovative applications at Sberbank realized by Vision Labs, which is part of Sberbank Group today. This has been is this innovation from Sberbank or Labs or anyone else? I can ask Max. Is it Sberbank or is it someone else? Or is it everyone? Is it big or small? Yes, that's the most important question. This is both big and small business, because this is Sberbank and Vision Labs. Well, I'd like to remind you of a funny case in point about big and small. There are some popular frameworks for machine learning, TensorFlow, others, Keras. And today, most of the frameworks is associated with the companies that invest into development. These are the largest open source instruments, on account of which they make profit, they hire staff, and the point is, originally there used to be tools which were developed by enthusiasts or scientists, scientific teams, but then, amazingly, they turned into employees of Google or Facebook. Another case in point of innovations. Do you remember an app called Prism to redraw your photos? Yes, some people remember that. And the funny thing is that rewriting photos or editing photos was first offered by Google in a deep dream app, more hallucinogenic stylization. Then Google Brain got on top of that, and then they came out with fully fledged user apps. Prism and other startups, about 10 of them, came out, but Google never emerged with anything. So this innovation, does it come from big or from small? Whose innovation is it? So this is a good question, and it's a good question. I think the answer is both. Depending on what you prefer, both answers will probably be correct. Thank you very much, Alexey. And of course, we'll move on to the big. I think that's a question for me. Dear colleagues, I think both big and smalls have their pros and cons. Obviously, the big have an advantage in terms of being able to invest significant resources, and small have the flexibility because, as you remember this famous psychological experiment when one person can lift the same amount as 4 people. Well, one person can lift 100, but 4 people cannot lift 400. They can lift 370 or 380. So it's a question of efficiency of large teams. But what we see today from the big players, they're trying to combine the advantages of smaller companies on account of more active investments into R&D, and are trying to distance themselves from the work of small teams. Because, of course, there are jobs that no one wants to do except for Google. For instance, optimizing the most popular framework for deep learning, TensorFlow, that Alexey mentioned, for working with TPUs and tensor processors. Only Google wants that, because only Google has these tensor processors, these TPUs. Not a single smaller company would ever conceive that. And doing other jobs that are very niche, most big players are not interested in that, because you cannot scale that. And that's why, on the one hand, open source provides an advantage. It is equally accessible to large and small players. And we said earlier that if we have any new conceptual frameworks or approaches to deep learning that emerged in the 80s, went into production 25 or 30 years later, today the latest language model from Google Bird, a few days later, went into production, not only for small but also large companies, including Google themselves. So the question of speed and time to market is critical. But of course, it's clear that the big players, for big players, it's difficult to be agile. And may I add one more point about the big players? The big players, compared to the small, also have vanity. So Google, for example, can afford to add more people and resources into innovations, like TensorFlow, for instance, because their vanity doesn't allow them to face the fact that it's not the #1 framework in the world. So Google wanted to make their answer. The smaller players don't have such motivation and ideas to compete with the giants. The giants can fight with each other, and on the leftovers of the fights, more smaller players can grow. Alexey, can I pick up on vanity? Everyone is waiting for the AI that is going to be sold on the shelf, like packets of milk. And us in the professional community, we're supporting this illusion in a way, because all the conferences come down to the parade of planets, and people say, well, I launched 200 bots. Another one said, I launched 400 consultants, online consultants. And it turns into a showcase with certain breakthroughs, and there are many of them, admittedly, but none of us is saying what we have to go through, the complexities and lessons. And of course there is a body of experience. If I could ask each of you in turn to tell us about the pitfalls or about the limitations which you come across and which hinders your faster development. Ivan? Well, what you mentioned is a part of the whole scientific community, because quite often there is publication bias when they only publish articles of success, and then a number of years later everyone is disappointed because it turns out we looked at the top part of the iceberg. That was all good and well. No one looked at the lower strata, and no one wrote about that. And this is why some time later, you can even look it up, there was an article in NY Times that many things thought to have great potential turned out to be the opposite. And naturally, everyone has to go through periods, through unsuccessful periods. I think the epicenter of this is that models often have inherent mistakes. We're all working with probability. Our job is to reduce the amount of errors, but they're always inherent. There is no faultless, seamless operation, so we need to do something to that. So if we talk about these fails, at the data phase we had a good session called Data.conf, and I'll remember a case from that conference. I only got into data science at CFT, this was back in 2016, and we were working on approximating the demand curve. Economists understand that the demand curve reflects how a person reacts to pricing, and then we can scale this reaction across many individuals, and we get a curve which indicates our returns. So the business certainly is interested in understanding this curve, and the first idea that everyone has is, why not measure it through data? Because we have sales data, we have units sold, we can put it together and build this demand curve. It should design itself. But if we tackle this head-on, then big science and big data, machine learning won't help, because the dependency is going to describe different things, not the ones you're looking for. In particular, your rules, well, let's stimulate bad sales with discounts and good sales. Let's increase pricing, and then the demand curve will go the opposite way. And this was one of the fails of machine learning, through which we later understood that the goals are not done historically. We need to experiment and research. And this is what Alexey Natekin mentioned today. This is one of the trends today. We need to understand the cause-effect relationship, and we can learn that through experiments. So various mistakes, various errors are normal, unnatural. More mistakes than successes? Well, speaking of Google, we had their engineer at QuoteFest at Novosibirsk, and he told us about how they do their testing, A/B testing, split testing, and according to his statistics, they said we come up with some genius feature, and then they go into testing, and it is indistinguishable from the current set in 9 out of 10 cases. You cannot detect this new feature, so only 1/10 works, but you already fell in love with that. You conceived this great gimmick that your users will bite. Well, no, actually not. So we're moving forward.
So, well, since we're working with large customers, mostly The main problem for us is this inertia thinking. If you like implement certain model or algorithm or platform that would show a business effect, not always banks, and we also work with retail, they are not ready to implement and spend their resources because they consider that they have some more critical and important areas. So it's not always that can implement good products. And second problem is not about machine learning, but because they try to include it everywhere. And it's not bad when in R&D projects this is not paid back. It's a popular task to select the best operator in the call center, and we made this case in a small bank, and actually it turned out that we reduced time of employees by 20 minutes each, but economic effect would be zero. So we had a pilot, but as a result, it didn't go further to industry. So I see that some tasks need to be resolved with machine learning, some should not, because there's no economic effect. Okay, thanks. Let me ask you a provocative question. I remember my own example, and it is related to the period of 2004, where the team of mathematicians worked with me, and they said that it's a great thing, like, why don't you prepare a document so that we come to the business and say that tomorrow the life will be great, and the results are like this. So in 7 days, they came with a document for 20 pages where we opened, and the first Russian word, let x equal, and then 20 pages were only with like ands, and then it was said that it's obvious from the above and certain conclusion. So no transition between this let x and it's obvious that. So for them it was obvious, and people from the business agreed to all these integrals for volumes and were ready to discuss. But I thought that the large issue is these communications, like why and for what reason, and how to reach out to the business. And Konstantin, do you feel any impediments here, or you have some other experiences, successful or not successful, at implementation? Well, I have the question as a problem of interpreting algorithms used. It's an important question. When we train a scoring model in the tens, where in Russia was all good, and then next year was a crisis, the models cannot predict this crisis, and every percentage point of is worth a few billion rubles, so fails are billions of rubles. And speaking about interpreting, like the question was posed when we started a voice assistant of Oleg, we trained them online on internet. We studied how people communicate online, but people are actually very angry, and they're even more angry online because there is certain anonymity, and they are hysterical, and even after you remove all the bad words and from the intellectual out of Oleg, they still phrase it and humiliate people with good, and it's impossible to predict because all the words inside are good. Another example, when a fail happened at the connection of technology of AI, when we disconnect a chatbot because someone downloaded a new model that should be better, but made a mistake when it's breaking. The call center is down for the whole day, and the idle time from 30 seconds could go up to a few hours, and the company starts to understand that they need to deal with AI seriously, and that would save billions. So the OPEX monthly for salaries up to 1 billion. That's both call center and incoming and outgoing calls, chats, and the potential that could be achieved is huge. So as soon as this potential is working, so any error would generate a loss equal to this amount. Thank you. Thank you, Konstantin. Alexey. So I'll try to make a TLDR, and I'll tell about error, which is not to make errors and to sit and be afraid of experiments. And it's a big fail, because otherwise you don't know what is going on. So there's a large number of fails that are due to imperfect communications between various people. First, we have business customers that have their own specific goals and what they need. We also have analysts, data scientists, specialists in machine learning, many other funny people, and where that need to understand what they're doing, and also should be a translator from human to their language and back, so that to check whether they made something wrong. So there is a structure also living their own laws and human values, and particularly they can not budget for a long time or any computational resources, and permit nothing. You can hire a data scientist in a bank, 150, that would not have a Python in their counter, and likely would not get it in any bank until he resigns. So the issue in communications between any of these three, it can all go wrong. So the business can ask AI just for the sake of AI, because it's like fashionable and to send a bot into space. And the scientists may not understand what they need from him, but they can build up beautiful models and write nice reports where it would say it's obvious that. So infrastructure can send them people, and that the security doesn't allow it, and you need to work it out yourself, and it's not our business. So if people learn to communicate better, the fails possibly would be less, and if not less, then it would be more productive. But now the main philosophy is that fails actually good. If you make a mistake, if you make experiments, even at a loss, it is useful data where you can learn if you can communicate about it. Of course. Thank you. Well, it's not that I support it, but it's a large problem. For me as a manager, working with other managers, this combination, and for me, the more I work on that, the more I understand that it's a legacy and an expression of the Soviet or Russian school education, because the better they develop hard skills and engineering skills, and the more senior person, it's felt more acutely, and the less social skills and the worse social skills, but to come to the business and sell something from the part of data scientists and machine learning, data scientists, 9 out of 10 efforts finish with fail. So the biggest difficulty is to find a data scientist with good productive vision. And they say about them as unicorns, and we can meet them, and we need to develop them. Another problem that Alexey touched upon is Soviet schools. I think many boys played in this dirty thief. When you get the architect, engineer, data scientist, product owner, each would perform, but overall it's not moving. It's a question that there should be one that should take charge of this movement, like implementation of machine learning, and take upon all the risks related to the fact that you might be beaten. And it's slightly biased because this is stronger felt at large companies, and I haven't worked at small companies and small groups. I think it is felt less there. But as we said, they have other issues related with shortage of resources. So these issues exist, and how to treat them. If I had a universal answer, I would not be sitting here. I don't know. But good news is that young data scientists, millennials, Zoomers, and they have better soft skills. They are less beaten by teachers at school, and they're more relaxed. And there is a trend that the guys 25 and less, they come with a open mind, and they tell obvious things for business. And so why startups? On the one hand, they are hands-on and many with technical education. I mean, the founders of technical companies, but on the other hand, they develop these pitch skills, and so they all these trainings and challenges, and our favorite managers' instruments, like getting out of your comfort zone. So thanks, Maxim. We have some questions, so let me ask one of them, and I will combine a few while we get immersed in this AI and other instruments. The people asking a more simple question, they ask, where is the AI in banking apart from fraud monitoring and chatbots? So, if possible, can you name one or two that are not overlapping this, so that we try to levelize this understanding before we dwell into that further? Yes, I remembered about chatbots and fraud monitoring. Lastly, we only come to these areas only now, but we started with the data. And CFT is two big businesses, one banking soft and another actually payment system, the Golden Crown, and various fronts in the payment system accordingly. One of the largest problems is understanding that this data that comes as not from our system, but we are happy about the quality of this data because we are responsible for that. So the first thing that I dealt with is verification of the last name, first name, and the address, that it is real. It turns out that not everyone has Fiasa. So we spent a lot of time on creating algorithms that would help this verification or data normalization. And we had a tender last year, and we are dealing with this a lot. Apart from that, everything related with transactions, like there are like sender of and recipients of this transfer, there's a way that can be optimized. Two things like supply and advertising, and models trying to understand what to offer, and here mostly not building model based on data, but many experiments that help us to figure out in this process. So these are two examples. Thank you, Dmitry. Well, actually, million tasks starting from scoring, that's a core bank competency. That's why we haven't dealt with that. Prediction of client churn. If you can predict it, you can call and ask better conditions. I mean, about our bank and businesses around targeting communications, whom and what, in which channel. to send, and this is related to bank products and relevant offers of our partners. If a bank has an ecosystem, excellent.
And of course, we can promote the partners, dog type of thing. And apart from that, regarding the targeted communications, Tinkoff Bank had conducted a trial on predictive stories. So on which user should be shown a particular offer on his mobile device. Yes, actually, we are quite actively working on the recommendation engine. It doesn't only recommend the products from inside the bank's ecosystem, but also the products of our partners, best offers, discounts, and so on. Also biometrics, everything related to that, voice and also face recognition. This is actively developing. We're a locomotive of a type in this regard. We're making an IBS jointly with Rostelecom. And speaking of chatbots, not only chatbots, there are also voice bots, and they also enjoy huge potential. These are robots that can actually make a call or take a call, make a meeting, tell you about a payment. And of course, these robots, these old automated robots, don't have to be used. They can be made more humane, and user experience can be improved. Scoring was also named, and apart from scoring, it's also important for any operating company to find new service scenarios, new service strategies, collection strategies, use strategies. This has to fall into the long-term strategy across the client lifecycle, and this set of offers on that happens with assistance of AI that can forecast everything accurately. That's about it. Well, I will support the statement that there are a myriad challenges, and of course, no matter which vertical inside the banking business you choose, no matter where you poke your finger, you can find an area to introduce machine learning. And I would like to send a message that could be called economic customer model, or a silly smaller brother. So look, you have a client and you have some information. So on the one hand, you can predict his LTB, forecast his LTB, so the amount of profit he will bring. You can predict his further actions. What is he going to spend money on? His purchases. You can also forecast the time he lives. So retention, all the retention challenges. You can also bundle that in a single system that will say, look, this guy is leaving, let's do something. Next layer, next level, we can begin to recommend which actions should we make if the person is leaving, whether he is going to bring us more profit, or we can simply let him go. And we can choose the right targeting or spamming strategy, which unique offer will reach this person. It can all be packaged and bundled into a single system, and there were about 7 cases, 7 different user cases that were described here. So speaking of a routine scenario, speaking of Africaton, last year we had a funny case with Sberbank. The job was automated machine learning. The participants had 24 various banking jobs, banking tasks from various sectors of the banking industry. This was scoring, this was ATM forecasting, there were also some recommendations and consulting, so 24 various challenges. Why not 100? Well, next time they'll probably give us 100. So this is some background for you to understand the scale of where this can be applied. Thank you, Alexey, Maxim. I think everything has been mentioned. It's just that the favorite HR subject has not been raised. HR can also use machine learning. For instance, you can analyze what your staff is posting online. Of course, asking them for permission at the outset, or how they use their corporate email, how corporate are their communications and character. Actually, most large companies and banks, including banks, are creating their own model repository, because we keep having discussion whether, for instance, a program has to be put into a recommendation cluster or a different cluster, and of course FTML, automation. I think it encroaches the territory of data science, but FTML automates one part of data science, but creates some new work for data scientists. So it removes part of the routine work, but it leaves more time for creative challenges. And today we see that simple jobs on classification are quickly tackled through FTML. For trivial cases such as scoring, forecasting, recommendatory services, HTML is quite effective. This year, AI agents are taking Russian language exams. This is necessary to better understand our clients and what they want when they turn to a call center or a chatbot. So I think it's easier to ask a question or quote a case in point of a sector where machine learning or AI is not applicable. I don't have any cases like that, I'm afraid. I'm almost out of cases. So yes, we're being attacked on all fronts. Well, we have touched upon this issue yesterday, but I think that it can also be discussed here. It's related to the subject, errors, responsibility for errors, borderline ethics. And in relation to that, I have a question to Ivan. You supply algorithms for other banks. For instance, I'm a medium-sized bank. I bought an algorithm from you, and then the algorithm has certain inherent problems. We spoke of probability, and then probability conflicted. Who is to blame? Now, who is to blame? How do you see this issue? It's a good question. I will probably leave the blame for later, but let me begin with trying to understand this situation. How clear is our offer? I think that's where we can find the answers to the second part of this question. I think the models are quite complicated, and this is a fact of life. However, when we discuss the end users, of course, it's impossible to explain it to them. We had a case when we tried running a promo campaign, and they asked us to describe how we selected our target audience. I said, yes, it's possible, but it's going to run into few pages, few trees, decision trees, and then we can use the decisions in the following tree. We can calculate that. It's pure maths. So there is inherent logic, but there is quite a lot of that, and it's not very straightforward. So we had to let go of this idea and use another approach. Most of our customers are internal customers that want certain personalized, customized jobs. There are less of them. It's quite easy to work with them. They're quite intelligent. And I think one of the speakers at DataFest in Siberia, one of the speakers said that mentioned three approaches towards interpretation, and in his last approach he said that a customer has to have a model. What is a model? Model is our understanding. That means there is an input and an output, and this gray area in between, we begin understanding that. So this is what we call model. And when a customer gets that, the way you go about creating it is regardless. There are mathematical methods that can say, let's take a specific case and study that. Let's look at similar cases. So we have tools to discuss a model, talk about neural networks, talk about the layers. So the system is selecting features itself to understand what is pictured. So it is possible to have a fruitful discussion with the customer. But if he says, I understand, we can move on. But let me describe what we dislike. We dislike errors. Errors arise naturally. People naturally make mistakes. Of course, we forgive that. People say, I got an SMS, got distracted, made a mistake. And with these mistakes, with these errors, I think it's much more important to fight these mistakes instead of interpretation. So we've done the auto-audit of a model. So we check every instance, we check its functions, we create an interface, and we ask the users to plug and play. If they see anything strange, please provide some feedback. And of course, there are some cases that are more important. These are restrictions, these are scoring, monitoring, and auditing. And if a system sees a 5% discrepancy threshold, it doesn't function. And if we talk of the source of errors, I think Alexey nailed it. Took the words right out of my mouth. There are three parts. First of all, setting the goal, then the model, and then there is infrastructure. So if we look at the errors inside the model, there are less of them. And the setting, or usually something goes wrong with the setting or the infrastructure. And so it's not the problem of AI, actually, but, however, a different problem in character. And quite often the errors are understandable. Of course, the scientist, when building the model, try to understand where it goes wrong, to try to fine-tune it. And when you look at that, you say, okay, I see, that's very clear. These two classes are very similar. Sender and receiver addresses, okay, they're similar. And semantics are very important here. We need to look into that. And then we can give the end user better understanding and the customer better understanding.
Про ответственность. Есть такое классное...
There is a great application for machine learning. It's called Deep Mutes. It draws a face of a different person on the head of another person, or vice versa. And we need to take a photo of a naked person. There is one option. You can Photoshop and attach a human head to a naked photo. There is a second option. Try to launch a GitHub app with artifacts in poor quality, but this poor quality has its own aesthetic flair. We'll try to launch such a tool that redraws a person naked. Is there a certain responsibility on the algorithm when it can Photoshop? Is there any responsibility burden on the designer? Because then the responsibility should be on the Photoshop designers. Could I please comment. I think this really simplifies this case. I'm a small bank. I go to Ivan Komarov and I say, Ivan, please help. Everyone has advisory consulting systems. Please sell me a model. Ivan says, okay, I will do. I can design everything for you at a certain price, so I pay a certain price. I put a model into production. And 2 weeks passed, it begins going to the 7th.
So, who is to blame? So, first thing, I was thinking, when me as being in charge of a small and medium bank, is to come to Ivan and say, Ivan, my 9th rail car is empty, so you promised 9 and I have 7. And next, the temptation is like, give me back a few million or part of it. So the company should understand that they provide services for white label, for modeling, and this is the area of responsibility which is not clear, because in your example it's clear the wrongdoer used the algorithm for their purposes, but in case of, like, Ivan didn't have a task to make some disruptive actions towards me, and moreover, he is risking his reputation. And the next small, like me, would not buy. So how to resolve this issue? Well, in this case, this problem can be resolved simple way. What was written in the contract, according to which for a few million the model was sold? Well, I'm not sure that in the contract everything will be written out about the model, everything. And it's conditional the day when we supplied it, it starts to breathe, it has certain lift in the indicators, and not always we get exactly the result that we made it test issues. So how Ivan explains that, like, please wait a couple of days and it will become better. How does it happen? And Ivan probably tried to answer. It seems to me that you correctly said about the reputation, because that's the only one, well, except the contract, as I need to read what you sign. And by the way, AI helps in this, and Sberbank has an interesting project on this topic, but one of the cases that was not mentioned. And reputationally, we'll want the models to work well. It's not like we made and run away. We would like to tell again what, because everybody's talking about success stories and many people are from science and we like to talk about success. So speaking about fails is want less. That's the main motivator. If anything going wrong, and then you can see, make it free of charge and make it correct. And many things that can go wrong, and this is already known that when you implement a model, then all of a sudden the data is wrong, and is somehow almost a trend. So the only way is to correct it fastly. It's like any complicated system when we send rockets into space and they fall, and you can make faster. Okay, thanks. I understand AI is protecting you here and cannot get the money. Well, overall, the problem is really thin, and when moving into the industry, we don't get what we expected at the first stage, and need to understand that, unfortunately, we also need to relate correctly to that and not burn your head. And start to analyze. I have a question to Maxim Yeremenko. He combines a few competencies. On the one hand, he is a person familiar with this AI, and also he is a risk specialist. So we all generated this AI that, as you mentioned, and put it everywhere, and then it started living its own life. So what we do with the model, what do we do with the model risk, because it increases multiple times, because you can imagine in all processes there are elements, and moreover, they need integrals in order to explain what's happening, and nobody can figure out what's happening, and it can turn out that at each step there should be some embedded element, so the model risk increases multiple times. So what do we do with that? You as a risk person, how do we manage it? Yes, it's a good question. There's a rational component here that, especially for banks, first, these are principles of 6, 8 eyes, a few lines of defense, and the model developer in data-driven companies, someone else is checking, who calls himself a validator, and for validator, the regulators and auditors also verify, and 5-8 years ago it was comparatively a trivial task, because most models were interpreted and it was clear how to what are the metrics of quality and threshold target indicated. Now the story with active right now machine learning becomes not so trivial, and but here we all look at the risk models and risk assessment models and assessment of forecasting and determining optimal cost parameters for products, and there are models of advisory services, but wrong work of these services is losing loyalty, and what the average driver is questioning about using Navigator from a well-known Russian internet company. Of course, they are cursing this company, but they don't have any other options, and they are not thinking why they are driving in this route and they lose additional 15 minutes, and what happened with stability of population on a data set of learning, and what happened with accuracy and reliability of modeling, target proxies and parameters. So we get services more often as any company service. With the development of IoT, mobile apps, for any service, it's becoming the option of getting feedback. So those models that are not interpretable and in advisory services for the last couple of years, they use so-called learning with support, where users WhatsApp and they offer to rate your call and put 1 to 5 stars depending on the quality and satisfaction. What colleagues say about stories and advisory content, recommended Yandex Zen service. We put likes and dislikes, so by this amount of likes and dislikes we can evaluate abstracting from explainability and interpretability of the model, can assess whether you are in line with client expectations. It's important to get this feedback. Many products incorrectly use machine learning and AI because the product designers forget about implementing this feedback. And so for data scientists and validators, another instrument like feedback of clients that are most objective, two ways to collect it. I ask a client, sometimes clients are irritated. Second way, by indirectly abstracting from emotions and bias to make this observation independently so the client doesn't know. But there's also specifics here, like noise reduction. When we get feedback and when we get out of stories earlier, not because we don't like it, because someone called. Okay, thanks. We've been talking a lot about it, but I think we'll remind all those seven wise men when they hold an animal and trying to guess what it is. So this model risk management from our side. So I have another question to Konstantin. And you mentioned this recommendation systems that you're actually working on. This is good. And is it possible to imagine or ask a question like Tinkoff wants to manage my desires and my events in my life? So where do you see ethical component here, and whether you want to bring me into this system so that you make this desire, this predicting it, and I partially lose my own will, and I'm like buying your recommendations all the time, and you start to manipulate me. Where do you see this boundary? Okay, we don't see a problem here. And the core reason is that people are not famous for like conscious understanding, and we need to take it into account. Me as a just simple consumer thinking about AI and technologies, and I don't want to think where is my money working that I earned. I want someone to decide for me and make the best way, let the money work the best way based on my risk profile. So I'm ready to lose something and earn something. So when it goes wrong, then we'll come to Ivan and say your algorithm doesn't work well. This concept of AI bank within the company strategy, we are thinking about this concept that's a bank that would decide for you and make you spend smart spending, and thinking about investment for you, and to some extent need to advise or recommend when to push the button, and it's all good, but someone does need it, that they want it to work by itself, and we feel this requirement. We are building lifestyle banking as an ecosystem, but AI is in the core, where you'll analyze your lifestyle and your requests, your spending, and they can give what you even haven't thought about it then, because your subconscious is freed up. And it's a simple example. We provide a case for targeted advertising, and guys did incredible thing. They went in the jury, and in the computer, the camera looking at you, and by your face they make a recommendation, and they put a camera on a girl, and they recommend some scene, some perfume, and she said, oh, that's the one I wear, and said about the Sochi, and I was surprised how they found out. So they were all surprised, and you predicted that I have some heavy malaise, and my next purchase retail services. So where is the ethics here? And you can sell this service to me, really, but are you going to sell it to me? Why not? I understand the view of Tinkoff Bank here. It's business-oriented. Well, there is a startup. Where is this boundary? Well, it's a startup cremating people and make diamonds out of it. So people want to take part in this process and make it nice. And although we're from this professional community, I'll tell you, you're much younger than me, and it comes with age, probably this fear, foolish fear, like to get this service. So I don't want to get this recommendation in my mobile bank. Right, your relatives will receive it. Well, this would be even worse, because from my side it would be ethical to tell about this to my relatives before mobile bank informs it's like your spouse is going to die. Well, it's a hype case when a Target store in the United States, I don't know whether it's true, they found out earlier about pregnancy of a daughter earlier than father, and I don't know whether it existed, but in principle it's not very ethical. Okay, thanks, Konstantin, and I will pass this question to Alexey about this ethics of using AI and many ethical questions there.
We have only touched upon one of the issues related to recommendations and controlling the corridor of preferences and desires, but I think these ethical issues are much wider here. Alexey? Look, I think I have just solved the dilemma with recommendations in a specific Tinkoff case. The problems with ethics will begin when these services are bought before they are shown as recommendations. So, for instance, when you are sent to cremation before you learn of this recommendation. But I'd like you to know that this is not a recommendation. This is even natural intellect, and I can work on this. So, cremating people to get diamonds? What is the business cycle here? Well, I think it's quite amazing, yes. There is such an industry as telecom. They can sign you up to services and charge you for them before recommendations, because FinTech may have something to learn from them. And as for ethics, well, Max, are you writing things down about diamonds? No, I think this is a great case of diamonds. We can sell diamonds at mobile Tinkoff to the next client, so it will be a closed loop. So I gave you the example about redrawing people naked. It's not an issue whether it's ethical to use it or to make such an app. The issue is when it will be made and how easy it is to produce it, because sooner or later someone will do that. I think, of course, we can worry about the horrors that people will start cremating people through their mobile banking apps without their consent. I'm not sure how soon that will come, but all the issues of ethics, of machine learning in our everyday life are not simply ethical or unethical. I think the question should be put as to how fast the implementation will happen. And the pioneers in this will certainly derive a bigger adventure. Thank you very much, Alexey. And I think I would expand the subject of this discussion. No. Well, these recommendations can stall us. For instance, who am I going to vote for? How can I be distracted so that I don't go voting, knowing who am I going to vote for? So, largely speaking, these recommendatory systems can be multi-layered, and largely speaking, we are moving to a large ethical challenge in that we are becoming manipulated in every sphere of our everyday life. Not just buying a red or a blue toothbrush, but everything that seems to be our free will is actually just timely forecasted through a certain channel, a timely message that can make us take a decision which is designed. I've got a data-driven decision of this ethical dilemma. Let's detail a region where we can trial our recommendation systems and test their limits. Let's measure the effects, and detect a problem. Or we can use Chinese experience. They may have multiple regions. Yes, there is such a region with a pilot ongoing. However, it's not a total experiment. So going by social score of a person, he is recommended and hired and so on. Well, it's not all the layers I've tried touching upon, because when we speak of recommendation algorithms, it's quite good to combine them with the impact. So this is forecasting the channel that will work, that's going to be effective for you, and also creating the semantics that you will bite. And these are the three tools of AI that working in conjunction are going to create such an effect on you that whether you like it or not, you're going to unconsciously go down the given track. Great. And so for design of the experiment, this is enough information. Well, I'd also like to add something. And I think similar problems were discussed at the early session this morning. They were case in point with Kalashnikov and arms. For instance, arm dealing is quite dangerous. Anything can happen. Or a case of elections that can lead to Lord knows what, ultimately. And, of course, that's the way it works. And the question remains, how are we going to live with that? Maybe try to restrict it. Some people will use darknet. So the story is not new. It repeats itself. It's not the AI's fault. Of course, it's going to exploit the relationships that exist. And of course, it can be used to give people messages, send people recommendations. It's not fully perfected yet, but I think it works. Well, this is quite horrible. This paints a picture of a gloomy tomorrow. But I'm going to agree with the colleagues. In a case with the division of a nucleus, on the one hand we got power stations, and on the other hand we've got the nuclear bomb. And it's not the fault of the actual nucleus. It still splits in any case. But in the people that apply it in various spheres of our life. And in a moment when at the time when the world was created and the good and evil was appeared, I think any tool can be used for both good and evil. And we have to understand that the era of something new, comparable to the power of impact on all of us, in terms of weapons, such as nuclear weapons, we need to understand the world we're living in, the restrictions, the limitations. I will probably thank everyone. I hope we haven't bored you to death on this beautiful Friday evening. Thank you very much and goodbye.